Hello and welcome to Gun Theory. Today we're doing a different sort of video. We're talking about how a double action revolver works. But before we get into the meat, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and if you want to support the channel, head on over to our Patreon page, link in the description. So, how does a double action revolver work? And really, what is a double action revolver? Well, older than the double action was the single action revolver. We're going to go ahead and make sure the weapon's safe. So single action revolvers, you had to manually cock the hammer back, and what that single action meant, what the one action that was being done, was dropping the hammer when we pull that trigger. So double action means that when you pull that trigger, you're doing two things, or the gun is doing two things. So the first action is just dropping the hammer as previously, but that new action, the second action, is that it slowly, if you pull the trigger slowly at least, cocks that hammer back and then does its other action, drops it. So that you'll notice that the trigger actually moves rearwards when we manually cock the hammer. This allows for a very, very light, crisp trigger pull. But then in double action, it's a lot heavier and longer of a trigger pull. It's very hard to be accurate when using the double action mode. Simply because it's hard to hold the gun still while you put so much pressure on that trigger. So the only real control on this gun would be knowing how to use the hammer, of course, cock that back if you need to, but then the cylinder lock, or the release latch. So on some revolvers, this latch will move rearwards, but on Smith & Wesson's and on this particular revolver, it moves forwards. You push that latch forwards and then the cylinder is no longer locked in place and it swings right out. So obviously each individual chamber in this cylinder is its own chamber. The cartridge is fired from the cylinder, and at that point, we'll notice a very small ridge in here as the barrel interfaces with the frame. That's called the forcing cone. And so the bullet will just barely be flush usually with the cylinder, and then it'll travel through this forcing cone and into the barrel. And then of course from there, downrange at your target. We can see on the breech face here, if we look, we can see a firing pin at the very top there when the hammer's down. So we should see that this metallic bit here, that will move rearwards a little bit whenever we go to push in the cylinder, and that's what locks the cylinder in with sideways motion. As for what stops it from rotating freely while you're shooting it, we're going to have to look at that system next. So we're going to have to manipulate the gun a little bit weird to show this off without the cylinder in here, because normally this is all kind of hidden by the cylinder. So we'll notice here, just in front of the straw, is our firing pin. But what I want you to watch is actually this elongated recess here. We're going to have to manipulate the gun weird to show you, but as we slowly cock that hammer back, you'll see, just in front of the straw, something called the pawl. And then when we pull the trigger, the hammer drops, the weapon fires, and then as we release the trigger, the arm moves back down and then back into position for another go. Now what that is interfacing with, what that arm is doing, we can see with the ratchet surface on the cylinder itself. So it comes up, it just pushes upwards here, which forces the cylinder to rotate a pretty set amount. So that's a large part of how the cylinder actually indexes itself without you having to manually index it every single time. Now another part of the system, so we'll notice right here another piece that seems to be silvery like metal rather than black finish like the rest of the frame. This is called the hand of a revolver. Pretty much all double action revolvers are going to have this basically the exact same sort of hand system. So then we'll also notice a little bit back here that there seem to be recesses that also seem to be lined up with that hand, and they're all around the cylinder. So what happens is that this hand locks into those recesses, and that also keeps the cylinder from bumping out of battery while you're trying to shoot it, because that would obviously not be a very good situation to be in. But as we look at the mechanism, we're going to manipulate it again. We'll notice that that hand, right, we're seeing that hand as we cock the hammer, it goes down just long enough to unlock from one of those locking recesses, just far enough so it can start rotating, and then as soon as it reaches another locking recess, this is spring loaded, so it pops up and locks into place. And in fact, you can see it in action. A couple of other things that we'll notice on this particular revolver that's common on many double actions that are intended for concealed carry, like this one. We'll notice that the sights, they are just part of the frame. They're integral to the frame as well as the front sight here. So you could never adjust these or change them out for other sights. Maybe you wanted night sights. This is not the gun for you because you won't be able to do that. They are pretty good sights, I like them. But a lot of people, if they want a concealed carry gun, one, they're probably not going to want such a short barrel for .357, and two, they're probably going to want to be able to change those sights up to get some good night sights or whatever they prefer. And as for just major components of a revolver, this is obviously the grip. That's what you grab onto. This whole piece here is the frame. And then of course our barrel. Now the frame is essentially what everything kind of attaches to be assembled into the complete gun. If we open our cylinder up, we'll notice that we've got an ejector rod here. That's what this rod is called. And then of course this is the ejector, that star-shaped ejector that has the actual ratchet surfaces. But then we'll notice another piece here. It's a pretty integral one to the revolver, and it's one that people overlook quite a bit. This piece here is actually what holds the cylinder in place, as well as the ejector rod. This is called the crane of your revolver. And this is what gets damaged when you see people in movies, you know, they'll spin the cylinder and lock it in and just throw the cylinder into place. That will damage your crane, and if this crane gets damaged at all, your revolver goes from a fantastic firearm to a paperweight. So you obviously would like to be as nice on that crane as you possibly can be. As for disassembly, many revolvers are very different. This particular one, we'll notice that we've got a hinge screw here. We're going to go ahead and take this out, and then we'll show you how to disassemble this particular revolver for cleaning, maintenance, what have you. All right. So as we get this screw out, one of the first things we'll notice is that this does not look like the sort of screw you maybe thought was in there. A lot of guns and revolvers use some pretty weird seeming screws and other pieces that you're not used to seeing. But this is very important. Do not lose this if you're taking apart your revolver and have one of those in there. But now we'll notice there's just a big old gaping hole there. So when we go to try and take out our cylinder, pop, the whole cylinder assembly just kind of pops out. We can take our crane off. This is the crane right here. And then we've got our cylinder and ejector rod. So for maybe cleaning or maintenance, maybe something breaks or your revolver's out of time, you're probably gonna have to take it apart to this level to get that problem fixed or to do that cleaning. All right, and then for reassembly, it's basically just a reversal of the process. Put our crane back in, and then I find it easiest to just lay the cylinder in, try to line up the crane as best as possible, and kind of push them in together as one unit. Then we'll notice that it is locked in place by the other mechanical locks, and so the screw can now go back in safely. And then of course, we'll need to use a screwdriver to tighten it the rest of the way after we can no longer use our hands for it. And now Let the screws back in. Everything seems to be in working order. And we're ready to go back out to the range and do some shooting. Oh wait, this isn't a revolver. But I hope you learned something. If you like this sort of content, make sure to subscribe, like, give me a comment down below, and maybe consider going over to our Patreon page to become a patron of this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.